All right, folks, welcome back to another week of Live from Drew's house. Hope you're all doing well out there. Coming off another great week last week. Got a couple more good shows for you here this week. Just me today. No Sarah. She won't be here for this show. I think she'll be here for the next one next week. But sorry to disappoint all the Sarah fans out there. Very excited about this week. Thanks again to Taylor Morgan last week. Gave us a look into life with COVID-19. That was great. I really enjoyed that episode. I think she was the last guest we had on. Today we move in another direction. Great guest, not a great topic, but Art Hogan of National Securities. He is a economic analyst, and that's kind of the story of the times right now. Coming off these crazy unemployment reports, just not good shape, and we get another one coming up at the end of the week, obviously, and I want to kind of see where we're going. Are we in the worst of it? Have we hit the peak? That sort of thing. Nobody is better at that than Art Hogan of National Securities. He's the chief market strategist at National Securities, 30 years in the business, and all that good stuff. He's great. So we'll ask some economic questions from him as Massachusetts begins to slowly reopen, which is interesting. We had an interesting weekend with protesters at Governor Baker's house. That got a little ugly there on, was that Saturday? They had that big protest outside the governor's house. And he's going to try to slowly reopen this like a lot of the other country has been doing. Some of the country going faster than Massachusetts, obviously. Massachusetts is one of the top hardest hit states, so that would make sense. We're going to be behind in the reopening process, but it's a tough situation with people out of work and losing businesses, and it really is difficult. It's a difficult balance. How do you reopen when people are still dying, and what numbers do you need to see? So, but Art Hogan's the guy that can kind of tell us where we're going in the unemployment reports and weeks to come. Are we through it? What is going to come back? What isn't going to come back? So why don't I get out of the way? We'll do that right now. I should also mention real quickly, we're going to have John Moynihan on Thursday, who is a really interesting guest as well. John is he's the director of the Firehouse Performing Center of Arts there. I think I just butchered that title a little bit, but the Firehouse in Newburyport. Very popular place, great shows, concerts, theater, all this stuff. He puts it all together, books all the talent, and kind of runs a tight ship. And I'm curious how his business is going as well. We'll talk to him here in our next show coming up. But for now, let's talk economics. We'll bring in Art Hogan here right now. All right, welcome back to Live from Drew's house here. Another edition. I bring in Art Hogan now. He's the chief market strategist for National Securities. Art, how are you, sir? Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to see you, virtually here. Where are you coming from?
So I'm actually at a cottage out in Nantucket for the weekend, and I'll be heading back tonight and going to my usual office, which is in Duxbury, Mass.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, I guess let's start with we'll talk a little bit about your personal ride to where you're currently at National Securities. But I do want to talk a little bit about the news angle here because let's face it, the unemployment report, another rough one here last week. I don't know what we're predicting this week. Is this the peak of how bad things get here?
Well, I'll tell you this, the second quarter and likely last month was probably the worst of the economic data. Yeah. Now it's certainly going to get bad and continue to be bad, but it's the crescendo of 36 million people filing for unemployment. The unemployment rate probably moves from 15% to closer to 22%. So all of that is just math. It's just an economy that we've frozen on purpose to stop the spread of a virus. So the near term is that the news doesn't get better, but it gets increasingly less worse as we head into the second half of this year. But right now we're in the worst quarter and likely the worst quarter that any of us will ever see in our lifetime.
You talk about you had the gig economy in too. You're talking about 3 million Massachusetts people here just in this state alone with filing for unemployment. That is a massive number. Was that expected even a month ago when you kind of forecasted this, or is this gone beyond even what the analysts were saying?
No, I would say this is in large part, it's in line with expectations. It's almost impossible to really estimate the amount of damage that happens when you when you stop the economy. And we've never really done this. This is an experiment. We've never done this before. So we've got a global pandemic. To stop that spread, we need to force everybody to stay at home. The people that can work from home are doing that, but obviously businesses that shut down need to furlough or lay off employees. So, and to your point, the things that a lot of the gig economy folks do, like Uber and Lyft, aren't being used right now. So, whether it's airplanes or ride share or staying at hotels or going to casinos or anything related to travel and leisure is completely shut down. And then virtually just about everything else that's non-essential has been shut down. The good news is that a lot of states, including Massachusetts, are going to start to reopen some things, and we're going to do that carefully and incrementally. But I think that's why we point to the fact that the worst of the data is probably in the rearview mirror, and data will incrementally get better and hopefully get better without a major spike in new case discovery of COVID-19.
Talk about this process too of it is going to be, I think, by all accounts, a slow reopening here. Massachusetts just being one of the hardest hit states. It's some other states have been jumping at it a little bit more aggressively, but this week starts it. We'll see what phase 2 brings whenever that happens. But it's not going to be like restaurants are opening their doors here, and this is not going to be this big jump into the pool here like I think a lot of people are hoping for. That's just not going to happen, right? I mean, it can't.
No, it really can't. I think to reopen, you have to do it really carefully. And I think Governor Baker was pretty clear on the businesses that can reopen are ones that are largely open now to a certain extent. It's the essential businesses and businesses that are able to actually practice safety. The businesses that don't have a lot of people, don't have a lot of contact with people, maybe some construction jobs where there's enough spacing and CDC protocols can be put into place. But it's an experiment, very much like an experiment was shutting everything down. The reopening is going to be the same kind of experiment. We're going to make sure we go about this safely so that we don't have a resurgence. And I think that we're going to learn along the way, what works and what doesn't work. Baseball's going to start in July with no fans in the stadium, and that should be interesting for us because everybody's starved for sports to watch. But, even that's going to be, remarkably different. And they put a bunch of rules in place for baseball players, no high-fiving, no spitting, all sorts of things. So it's a brave new world we're going to be living in this reopening. But I think America's very resilient, and we've gone through things where we had to change our behavior before. If you go back to 9/11, we never had to take off our shoes and not have a bottle of water when we went on an airplane or through security, and getting used to TSA rules and all sorts of things that we adjust to. I'm sure we're going to adjust to this. It's the gradualism and the incrementalism that's going to be important, and making sure that we know that this first step was successful and safe. So the next step will be what we trust to be the safest next moves here. So no, we're not flipping a switch back on. We flip the switch to shut this economy down, but it's not binary on the way back in. We're going to have to be awful careful and take the appropriate measures to make sure what we're doing is safe.
You mentioned 9/11, which of course is one of those moments in history that you do look for comparisons in when something drastic has happened. A lot of the unemployment talk has gone back to, worst unemployment reports since the Great Depression, that sort of thing. So many of those businesses obviously didn't come back. Just I wonder, do you see differences here though, as far as just being a completely different crisis? Do we predict that a lot of these businesses are able to come back if they can make it through this storm, or is this going to be a mess on the other side?
Well, I'll tell you this, there's going to be some demand that's been destroyed, right? So travel and leisure is demand that's been destroyed. We can't go back and fly, 4 times as many times in the fourth quarter as we would have in the first and second quarter. So that economic loss is permanent. And the same is true with restaurants and all things related to recreation. Now, what's temporary demand or delayed demand probably sees a resurgence. So those things that we've wanted, like the supply chains for the next Apple iPhone, come back online in China, and we're able to order that. So that's delayed the consumption, and that probably comes back with a vengeance. But to your point, businesses fall into one of 3 categories: the essential businesses that have remained open and actually flourished. You think about the fact that we're talking on Zoom, so.
Yeah.
That's a product we're all using more than we ever thought we would with work from home. All sorts of computer software and our internet connections and things like Google and Netflix that have kept us sane as we stayed at home and consumed content on Disney Plus. Those businesses have actually done well. So those are businesses that actually fall into that category of flourishing in a bad economy. The second would be companies that will likely come back and do well. And those are the businesses that will probably be the first to open. And some of those fall into categories that have nothing to do with restaurants and travel and leisure, but much more businesses that can appropriately distance. So some retail. Now, there's companies that probably never come back, but I think the third category falls into categories of businesses that were structurally impaired going into this, and their demise was probably sped up. So we're hearing about bankruptcies from companies like J. Crew and Neiman Marcus, and the problem with some of those companies in the brick and mortar world was the structural changes as to how the consumer actually buys their goods, and what this shutdown of the economy has actually done is showed how close they were to the precipice of going out of business to begin with. So we'll probably hear more bankruptcies in the brick and mortar retail world, which is sad but inevitable. I think what we're also hearing is in the energy complex, a lot of highly levered domestic E&P companies that are filing for bankruptcy because they just can't live in a world where the price per barrel of oil is in the 20s and not in the 30s or 40s. So, I think that those companies are going to, either disappear or get gobbled up by larger companies. In large part, what's going to be interesting is in the airline industry, will we have consolidation? And I likely think we will. The airline industry, for example, coming into this pandemic was actually investable for the first time in many, many years, and then it got shut down. So I think there's going to be fewer airlines, and I think they're going to, especially if they're going to have to run at partial capacity for an extended period of time, meaning not filling any of those dreaded middle seats and such. But I think that it'll be interesting to see that third category of companies, either that would have gone by the wayside if not for this, it just sped that up, and then industries that will probably see a lot of consolidation, like the airline industry and likely in the energy production industry.
Again, we're joined here by Art Hogan, Chief Market Strategist, National Securities. And you just hit on so many great topics there I wanted to follow up on too. And one of the big overriding themes of all those things you just mentioned too, though, is whether you talk about flying, ballparks, I'm thinking concerts, all these things, even if green lighted in say a year and a half, however many years, are people going to be in a rush to get back? Are people going to trust it too, is another thing that these businesses have to look at too, right?
Yeah, that's what we're going to find out. That's the part of this. It's the experiment. It's the human nature part that we can't model. We can't try to sort of put in a clean estimate just how many people are going to be willing to do things like travel again and go on a cruise ship, go to a concert that's going to be crowded, and therefore three things happen, right? Either those things don't come back with a vengeance, or they come back in a different way. Travel is going to come back in a different way. I don't know the next time you and I will agree to go on a cruise. Someday we probably will. I think part of it's wrapped up. The second thing is wrapped up in what we learn in terms of therapeutic and vaccine for both this virus and preventing it in the future, right? So while a vaccine is probably out 12 to 18 months, therapeutics are coming online that are actually making us better at treating people that actually have this. So I think that's good news. So on the healthcare front, is probably going to be more important than to the reopening of the economy than necessarily the economic data that we look at. I think that progress that we make towards the vaccine, and certainly the progress that we are making in a lot of the therapeutic areas, probably make us feel more comfortable returning to normal life. And that's probably next year's business. So certainly not talking about the second half of this year, but I certainly think that as we get more comfortable with the fact that we're on top of this epidemic, that we're on top of how to treat this. Do we have a vaccine for it? If I get this, are there therapeutics that are going to help me make it through? Then I think as human beings, we'll probably naturally feel a little more comfortable and returning to what used to be normal.
And you hit on the brick and mortar stores too that are going to take a serious punch here, and if they survive this. But even I've heard estimates that even like the governor of Texas said, these stores can reopen. You're open for business, big thumbs up and all that, but then limited it to 25% traffic. And I think by most most analysts say that if you do that, you're actually going to cost yourself money just by opening.
I think that's really true. I think that's true of restaurants too. I think restaurants being able to reopen, but you have to run at 30% of capacity, and can you do that properly? And I think that the nature of those businesses will imply that if they can't, if you're running a business and you trying to figure out what your total revenue will be if you're running at 30%, you're probably not going to reopen, and you probably look for some relief on your rents. You certainly look for relief on how many people you use to run your business, whether you're a restaurant or a retail store. I think all of that's going to be something we need to figure out as we start to incrementally reopen. And I think that I think all of that's correct. I think what it's taught us is that there's going to be a new normal for a period of time, especially in retail, where you have to have the ability to do both things and do both things well, right? So you've seen some of the companies that have done well that have more of an omni-presence, which just means they're able to sell in their brick and mortar stores, but they actually have a really good user-friendly online application. And that's one of the things that's really sped up quite a bit is the percentage of consumption that we do as individuals has moved so quickly online that the percentage of overall retail consumption has gone from the low teens to the low 20%. And that happened in months. While we've had online shopping for years, it's just the amazing speed at which we got to that percentage. And it's hard to know that it's hard to think that we're going to go back to where we were before. But there's something about the retail consumer. There's something about the American consumer that loves the touch and feel of the things that they purchase. And there's certainly things that we can't buy online that that keep that percentage of people going to places, right? So there's all sorts of things like gasoline is very difficult to buy online. Auto parts has never been something you've bought online. So groceries comes and goes in terms of its ability to do that online. But it's going to be an interesting retail world next year versus what it looked like last year.
So you're saying this is why the newspaper never goes away, the hard copy, right?
Right, exactly. It's interesting. And I've got 2 hard copies right behind me that I was reading before we started talking.
I like the hard copy too. I like to think there'll always be a place for it, but I guess that's a topic for another day. Again, Art Hogan joining us here. I wonder, you touched on baseball a little bit, and that's been a big conversation over the last week. I actually, completely out of curiosity over the weekend, took a look at, turned on the German soccer, the Bundesliga, which started playing soccer in empty stadiums. Very weird for a few minutes. But you know what? As a sports fan, not bad. It's still a game. They still compete at the high level. They block it out and go. I'm picturing myself watching a game from my TV in an empty Fenway Park. I think it could work, and I think people are craving it. But these business negotiations are they don't necessarily seem close from what I'm hearing. I'm sure you've maybe even been a part of or watched some of these behind the scenes negotiations go. It gets dicey when you start talking about, even with millionaires, when you start talking about taking people's pay cuts or making pay cuts and shortened seasons and putting up at hotels for weeks so people stay safe. This is not an easy thing to implement. Am I right?
No, I think that's entirely correct. And it's interesting that you bring all this up, because I think the way I look at this, and you're right, it's difficult to sort of make this economically make sense, right? So if you're taking one of the largest revenue producing aspects of being a team owner, and that's the fannies that go into seats and buy all the products that you sell in the stadium, and make that go away, at least for a season. Can you rationalize, staying open and running your business and not making, cuts to your largest input cost, which is clearly labor? So I think that's where the negotiations start. I think at the end of the day, the things I contemplate is when we think about broadcast TV, the one thing that has the largest value is live sports. And it has the largest value because that's one thing you can't stream, right? It's one thing that you want to watch live. You want to know what the results are. So that's why the advertising revenues are the largest, and that's why the largest revenue contribution for all of these organizations is their TV contracts. So I think at the end of the day that there will be some balance, and there will be some negotiating on both sides, both from the players' unions and from the owners, to get something successful in what is an extraordinarily unusual year in the hopes that that goodwill on both sides moves us forward to a place where we get back to something that's much more normal next season. So I think that, no, I agree with you. I've watched some pretty unusual sports, just scrolling through and watching baseball in Korea. And one of the games I watched had mannequins in the stadium, so it looked like there were people there, but they weren't, and just a surreal experience. But it shows what we're craving, right? So we're all going to be watching two older PGA golfers battle each other with a couple of quarterbacks, and it's probably going to be a blockbuster result. So there's all sorts of things that we'll do to adjust to a new normal, so that we can consume the content that doesn't just entertain us, but it actually brings us to a place where we feel better about what we're doing, right? So, to me, baseball is kind of a religion. It's a rite of spring. It's a signal that the summer's here. It's baseball on the radio has always been my background music. And I can't wait to have the ability to at least listen to a game or watch a few games. And I don't think that's going to be any different. And I think that both the players' unions and the owners know that we need to have some semblance of a baseball season to get America back to normal.
Yeah, you would think being America's pastime, that may even add a little bit of pressure on these guys to, maybe the country needs this. Maybe we need to be there. But I do think they're feeling that a little bit, and we'll probably make something happen. Keeping with the sports theme for a second, are we talking about empty football stadiums come the fall if there is a full season?
Yeah, likely. I think that in terms of stadium capacity, I think unless and until we get to that point where we know that we've inoculated enough of the population that it's safe to be back in crowds, we're likely to see the same thing, whether it's professional football or college football games. They may have the ability to do that in empty stadiums and have the same kind of revenue mix, but it's going to be very difficult. College football is a very expensive sport, and not very many games get put on TV, so you worry about that. But in terms of knowing when it's safe to have things like concerts or sporting events where you have large crowded stadiums, going to be much more towards the other side of this, when we can vaccinate enough people, or at least do antibody testing to know that people have had this and are likely immune to this.
We have a lot of musicians on this show, a lot of local musicians who obviously it's one of those industries that have been just decimated. I mean, so many of these guys and women make these livings off of playing bars, playing restaurants, playing small theaters. Obviously, none of these places are open right now. The live stream is a whole different ball game, and so many artists have done a great job either utilizing it or learning it. But it's not necessarily, from what I can tell, it's very hard to, a lot of donations relying on, it's not exactly a moneymaker. These people musicians, let's stick with that for a moment. What kind of relief do they get in this kind of economy? Is it, it seems to me like it could be a battle, and a lot of these people are out there performing 5 nights a week on live streams with PayPal and Venmo links up there. And, it's almost, it's not strange to watch. You get it, but it's just such a different world. This is how I'm getting my live music now.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So I've got a son who lives down in Nashville, just finished up his senior year at Vanderbilt. And you talk about musicians that make their living by being able to go to small venues and produce music. And that's a big part of that economy of that city, amongst a lot of other things. But I think that, when I'm talking to him over the weekend about what it's like, he said, that you probably have something like 20% of the performances that you would see, and understanding Nashville is one of those towns where you can't go into a restaurant or a bar or a pub where there's not live music, and it's usually fantastic. So the same type of thing. I think it's it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to what kind of aid can we get to artists writ large, whether it's musicians or for the arts in general. Tanglewood canceled their summer season for obvious reasons. That will likely come back. I think the BSO and are we going to have a Christmas Pops? Hard to know, but not likely unless we sort of get to a place where we know that it's safe to have a lot of people in the same room at the same time. So it's a very, very difficult industry to sort of try to ascertain what the end game is going to look like. But again, this is an unusual time, and certainly there's no precedent for this, so it's hard to know what that looks like coming out the other side.
I hear you. Art Hogan, again, Chief Market Strategist for National Securities, joining us here, asking a lot of I'm asking a lot of these questions and getting very interesting answers. And hopefully I'm getting to the ones that so many of you have as well, because it is a crazy world we're living in. You mentioned, I actually saw, when speaking of concerts, there's a town here in Massachusetts. I forget, it's in Massachusetts or New Hampshire. It was a New England base, and they're actually rethinking the concert game and opening up the parking lot to have you drive your car in and almost like take up a parking spot. And, I don't know how it ends up playing out, if you sit on the hood of your car or what, but and they're going to have a live stage and you play up there, and, they'll have a band and you play from like 5 to 7 and you park in the parking lot and watch the show. Seemed like an interesting idea. I guess there's a toll taker, I guess, when you come in. I don't know how it all works, but the concert industry now, right?
Yeah, I love that concept. When you think about that, it's the analog would be driving movies. And when I was growing up, that was the way you went to a movie, right? So you got in your car, your family got in the car, you parked your car, you put a little speaker in the window, and you were able to watch a movie. And oftentimes it was a double feature. I think that concept conceptually for the consumption of music content works just as well. It's just a function of how quickly can we make that change. And I think we've proven that we can change pretty quickly. We have 99% of my firm is working from home. That happened overnight. It didn't happen because we were any different than anyone else. We had a plan to keep people mobile. Technology is a lot easier to sort of get your hands on, and the same thing is going to be true whether it's in the music world or certainly in sports, but in all sorts of entertainment. I think we're going to adjust to the new normal and try to bring that content to people in a way they can consume it for the time being, until we can get back to a place where we go actually to the Garden to see Elton John and Billy Joel and all the great things that come through that building.
I'll take pretty much anyone right now, right, to go see a live concert. You talk about all these. You have the president, you have all these governors, mayors at the more local level. All of them have all these smart people like you around them, giving them advice and trying to balance out this. We keep hearing that you can't have the can't have the cure be worse than the. I'm mixing that up, but you know what I mean. You can't make this worse by shutting everything down. And I'm wondering, what are those talks like behind the scenes? Because it must be. I mean, we saw the protest this weekend outside Governor Baker's house. That got a little bit rowdy, it seemed at times, and I expect more of that if a lot of these businesses don't open. And I mean, just on a human level, you understand it. I mean, you work your whole life to build these businesses and all that. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see these things go out of business, and you're just losing everything by not being able to open up and not being able to go to work. And I think anybody understands that at the human level. Talk about that balance of just trying to take the public health first, the economy. I mean, it's brutal. It's hard to watch, even just being an outsider.
Yeah, well, three things to think about on that front. First and foremost, luckily, in the United States, decisions on being open or not open, are run at the state and local level. So I think that point is really important. So you can have an administration that says, "Hey, we're back, vaccine or not, we need to reopen now." And that's fine, but the decision to shut wasn't his, and certainly wasn't the federal government's. It was every state that made a decision on their own. So it certainly started with things like universities and the best way they wanted to operate and keep people safe. It was college sports that shut down before professional sports. But certainly when you think about the state and local level, that's where decisions are made. And these decisions are hard because you're talking about a revenue base that gets depleted on the state and local level as well. So, the states and cities want to see their tax base grow, not shrink, but they also want to see their citizens stay alive. I think the second thing is that balance that you talk about. What's the appropriate level of reopening of businesses? If you can prove that there is a protocol that will keep your employees safe, that will keep people safe, and that's something that we can all agree on, then that business is going to reopen. But there are some things you just can't do, and I understand the frustration for sure. I mean, we all feel it. And, there's all sorts of things that we have on our new bucket list of things we can't wait to do again, and a lot of those have to do with businesses that probably take longer to reopen. I think the third thing and most important is we need to work together. Communication is probably the number one thing. Having a plan and letting people know, okay, we're going to try to reopen on Monday. Here's what that's going to look like. This is phase 1. Oh, by the way, this is phase 2. If that goes well and the data shows that we're able to do this, we're going to have the next tranche of businesses be able to reopen. And phasing that in, being incremental, being cautious is the best way for all of us to understand that there will be a point in time where everything is back open again. If we try to rush this and make mistakes, we're going to end up back where we started, and that's not a place anybody wants to be. So the three things that I really care about is that all of these decisions are local, and that's important. It's important for businesses to understand, and decisions get made in an appropriate fashion so that we're careful on the reopen process, and all of us try to understand and communicate with each other why it is we're doing the things that we're doing to try to stay safe. And at the end of this, the most important thing is going to be medicine more than it's going to be decisions made by governors and mayors and senators. It's really going to be, have we found things that on a therapeutic basis help us get through this process, and in the end game, really finding a vaccine to make us all feel safe about going to Fenway Park again.
All right. Well, yeah, that sound good? Cure is not, you can't make the cure worse than the disease. That's what I was trying to say. That's the thing the president keeps saying. So that's that balance, of course. But again, Art Hogan joining us. Art, so National Securities right now, what was the road to get here? I'm a little bit curious about I've talked to you a million times, but I never really talked to you about the road to where you're at now.
Yeah, so I worked at Jefferies probably for most of the time that I talked to you, which was in large part an institutional broker-dealer investment bank, and really enjoyed my time there and really grew something. Spent the better part of 14 years there growing a business, and got to a point where we had reached critical mass and I wanted to grow something again. So I ran into some friends I've known for a while that were working for a firm called National Securities, and they're in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'd never been to Memphis, Tennessee before. I couldn't really point it out on a map, but got together with these guys and helped them grow their business. We sold that to a firm. I did my workout during that and decided to trying to help someone else grow a business, and again ran into some friends that were trying to grow out the equity capital markets, the institutional portion of a firm based in New York. Loved the management team and what they were doing, and have spent the last 2 years helping build that out, and very proud of what we're doing. So I've always been a person that likes to build things and grow things, and I'm doing that now and love every day.
Nice, very good. And you have you mentioned your son in Nashville there. What's the any other kids or?
Yeah, I got a daughter that's going to school. She'll be a senior at Cornell with whatever that looks like in the fall. Yeah. Not sure, but she finished her coursework online to wrap up her semester. She was actually in Paris doing a semester abroad, and the Thursday or Friday night that the president announced that he was shutting off all traffic to from Europe to the United States. Constant panic for a lot of us. All the flights out of Paris got booked up in about 10 seconds. So my wife and I came up with the idea of getting her on a train over to the UK and got her to fly home out of London, which actually worked out great. And she's home and safe with us in Duxbury, and looking forward to whatever her senior year looks like.
Wow, what a story that is. Good thinking there on the fly.
Yeah, well, there was one of those things where I said, wait a minute. He said Europe. He didn't say the UK. He left travel from the UK open, so we had a short window. And then oddly enough, she got on my Tuesday and they shut down traffic or travel from UK at the end of the week. It's not to say she wouldn't be able to get home, but it certainly would be a pain in the neck. So we're thrilled to have her home, and she and my wife had to quarantine for about 2 weeks together in the house, and I had to move to the garage.
I can't. Well, yes, I could see where that might happen. I've heard all sorts of stories of, and I don't know how your dynamics are, but I know I have a cousin who's a senior at Coastal Carolina right now, and tough year to be I think it's tough on them too. We keep hearing a lot about the high school seniors. It's tough as a college senior too, going through this, just not exactly playing out that final year like you had envisioned. He's taking it well, but I do hear all these stories about, but just like your case, senior, about to be a senior in college, now at home with mom and dad. Like, are there interesting dynamics? It's a very interesting age to be. I'm trying to picture myself going into my last year of college and like being forced. I love my parents, but being forced to stay with them, I think we might have some issues on a daily basis. That's a whole different game.
Yeah, sure is. I think about this in multiple levels. You mourn the loss for your son's senior year. He basically lost his senior spring semester, which I think all of us, reflect back on, and with a great deal of fond memories of the great things you got to do and how much fun it was and what you really worked it towards for so long. And then the that whole dynamic of actually being an adult and virtually living on your own in another city, transitioning rapidly to living back under the same roof as your parents, psychologically it's going to be so difficult. At that age, I remember, and I'd be the same way. The last thing I wanted to do was move back into my parents' house at that point in time and navigate that process. But it's I think it's incumbent on both the parents and the student to try to find ways to trust each other and treat each other like adults, not like they're still in high school. So yeah, there's a lot more. There's a lot more responsibility given, but there's a lot more. There's a lot of things that we like to do as a family to make it feel like you're actually an adult here. So, for example, my daughter has had a dress-up gala at our house for 3 Saturdays in a row, which has been spectacular, where we put on fancy clothes. So we have to take showers and we make adult cocktails like Cosmos and martinis and have a fancy meal. And it's just the 3 of us, but it feels like we're doing something special. My daughter's been the person that's planned all that, and it's wonderful. We have great pictures and have a wonderful time. So she gets to make those adult decisions. She plans a lot of our meals. She's been fantastic. And she actually set up an online group using FaceTime with a bunch of my wife's relatives. And twice a week I play Yahtzee for $5 a game. And I've joined a few times, and I can tell you I'm down about $50 right now. So I'm not very good at that game, but it's a great way for her to sort of feel like she's contributing to the social interaction of people that are stuck at home.
It's like a night out you organized there. That's very good.
Yeah, it was wonderful, wonderful. Good music and good food and fancy dress. It just happened to be in our dining room.
Very good. Well, that's cool. What did she say about the virtual learning and all that? I know my cousin was telling me they pretty much went to like pass or fail. It wasn't so much grades or anything. It's just either do it or you don't. And that's kind of how they're doing it. She have similar stories or?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's in this day and age, going virtual was not as hard for them as it probably would have been for us. I think that it's because it's not that far askew from the way they consume educational content in real life. But that whole pass-fail thing is one of those things where is it thrown out there so that you don't have to worry about it, but you still participate, or is it thrown out there because hey, we're doing the best we can to accommodate this? And depending where you come down on the academic rigor, and I'll tell you a funny story. My son had pass-fail to wrap up his courses, and he took it. And he found out that it was 4 courses. He got 2 A's, and that won't show up in his grade point average. And he's a little upset about that. So it's one of those calculations you make where it's like, oh, if I hadn't gotten pass fail and accepted the grades, I'd have this instead of that. But I think college kids are very resilient and certainly computer friendly and certainly, able to make that transition. It's the social aspect of their senior year that is the part that they will likely miss the most and regret the most. But, it's a sacrifice that they've certainly had to make. And one we probably don't talk about enough.
You're probably right. I keep thinking back of my senior year, high school and college, and you miss out on so many great moments. And I keep seeing all the parades in my neighborhood, the athletes and the, whatever. I don't even know what half of them are. There's so many of them, but they could be for so many different things. But they are cool seeing the community come out. And just it makes you really realize how important it is to so many people. It's tough to see, but we'll keep thinking of them, and they'll move on. They're young and resilient, and how that stuff goes. Again, Art Hogan here, Chief Market Strategist for National Securities, joining us. We usually end our show with a little rapid fire. Are you up for some random ones? You're supposed to not hesitate. I have no way to hold you to this, but it's supposed to be the first thing that comes to your head.
All right, fantastic.
Ready? All right, favorite hobby?
Favorite hobby is fishing.
Fishing, all right. Favorite musician?
Jimmy Buffett.
Oh, okay. I think that's the first Jimmy Buffett answer, surprisingly, we've had on the show. All right. Let's see. Favorite movie?
Casablanca.
All right. Good one. Do you have a favorite comedian?
Steve Martin, probably my favorite.
Steve Martin. Very good. Best concert you've ever seen? That's a different question than favorite musician.
Best concert I ever saw was, because of where I was in my life, it was The Clash, and they played at the University of Vermont when I was a senior, and I can't remember a better time.
You saw The Clash at UVM?
Yeah, I saw UVM had some great concerts. Saw Grateful Dead there twice. all sorts of concerts. But the Clash was just an amazing confluence of events that turned out to be one of the most memorable evenings of my life.
No kidding. Burlington is one of my favorite cities.
Yeah. Long story short, Joe Strummer came back to our apartment and hung out with us and jammed for several hours after the concert was over. But it's not something I will soon forget.
He came back to your apartment?
Yeah. Well, it's a very long story. My roommate was a bartender at the place where the band went after the show was over. I was hanging out with him. Band came in. Joe Strummer started talking to us. He said, you guys want to hang out for a bit? Came back to the apartment, and we were up until really, really early in the morning.
I could not let that go without a follow-up. I'm sorry. That is a little side note that you're not going to get by. My goodness, what a moment.
Yeah, it was crazy. So that's what places it at the top of the pile of concerts.
Yeah. Side Burlington, Vermont story. I had I don't know if you've heard him. He's starting to become a big name, but a man by Ryan Montbleu was on our show a couple weeks ago and was playing some songs for us. And he was in his little living room in Burlington, Vermont. And he said, I was playing right here yesterday. And, I kind of look out the window every now and then. This is where I do most of my work now. And Bernie Sanders comes walking right by. And,
that's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Going for a jog, I guess.
Yeah, they say it's a small world, but when you get up to Vermont, it's really small.
It is, definitely. Favorite sport? Favorite sport?
Baseball.
I thought that might be the answer. Is it a Red Sox fan or?
Red Sox fan, yeah, lifelong.
Born and raised,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
so
funny story. When I was really young, the Red Sox were playing in a World Series, and my dad came to the school I was in and told the head of the school, it was a Catholic school, he told the Sister Helen Good that he needed to take his son home for a family emergency. And I had two sisters that are older than me going to the same school. And she said, do you need the girls too? And he said, it's not that kind of emergency. We watched a day game when the Red Sox were playing in the World Series. So it's been ingrained for a long time, just proving that my dad was willing to lie to a nun so we could watch baseball together.
That is a great story, yes. And all the high school kids just scratching their heads saying, World Series game in the daytime, what?
Exactly. I'm kind of hoping with the new format of baseball, there'll be more day games because, people that are working from home could probably consume that content. So putting some day games in there, I think would make a great deal of sense.
In a pandemic, it's easy to, we'll take anything at the moment. But I've always thought in the last decade or so, as I've, I think about people keep saying baseball is dying. And for me, it's my favorite sport. But so I don't necessarily feel that, but it's, okay, you tell me baseball's dying and kids aren't into it. I can accept that for certain reasons. Maybe they need to make some changes, adapt to the times. But I've always thought maybe World Series baseball. Why not throw in one day game, right? So how much of a business killer is that? It can't be that.
It really can't be, and I couldn't agree with you more because that's what gets that youthful enthusiasm for the sport to remain there. If it's not something you can watch as a young kid, if you're in grade school and you can't stay up until 11 o'clock when games are almost halfway through. You're not going to be able to hold their attention. So I think I agree with you. And I'm very passionate about day games. I just think bringing a few of them back, both in the playoffs and the World Series, would do a world of good to get people more interested.
Me too. And I mean, even they doing like the Saturday afternoon night game kills me too. And they're play the game in the day, will you?
Right, exactly.
We could go on that all day probably. And hopefully we can get back to Fenway Park soon. Art Hogan, this has been a pleasure. What final thought here? We got more numbers coming out at the end of the week. What are you predicting?
I can tell you this, the retail sales, which came out at the end of last week, were as bad as we expected. Virtually shutting down the economy is going to show some really bad numbers as we head into this week. I'm much more interested in what we hear on the healthcare front than I am necessarily on the economic data front, because the known unknown is that the economic data is bad. The unemployment's going to get worse before it gets better. We need to make more progress on the healthcare front. We need to hear about therapeutics that are working, and we need to find a path to that vaccine. So as we head into next week, I'll be paying more attention to healthcare news than I will to economic data.
All right, interesting. That has been very informative. I appreciate it very much. You don't have a coffee mug with you, do you?
I do have a coffee mug.
Go here. If you have it right nearby, go grab it. We always end with a coffee mug moment. I should have told you before. Sorry. What do you got? Ooh, what do you got?
It's from a little diner that a friend of mine saw, and it's got my name on it, so I thought it was a great gift.
That is fantastic. New York, huh?
Yeah.
Great city. I got I'm all alone in the house at the moment, so I stuck with the I love my dogs thing. I got the two big dogs here, so. That's what I'm going with. All right. Well, virtual cheers, Art Hogan. It was a pleasure. I wish you all the best, and thank you for all the good work you do for keeping people informed and all this stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun.
It was a pleasure. It was great to catch up with you. Take care and stay safe.
All right. You too, Art Hogan. All right, good stuff there. Art Hogan, Chief Market Strategist of National Securities at National Securities. What a he just breaks it all down for you in such a simple way, doesn't he? I hope you all enjoyed that. He's been all my work in news over the years. He's always been a go-to guy when it comes to just simplifying things and laying out the numbers for you, and he's usually right on it. I just thought that was very interesting, and I thought, what better person to go to in these tough economic times than Art Hogan, the Chief Market Strategist for National Securities. So hope you all got a little something out of that. It's a crazy time. I know we're starting to slowly reopen the state here, and we'll see what the coming weeks bring. But I guess all you can say is stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Keep that social distancing up and all that good stuff, and keep the spirits high. Sarah should be here for the next show. I think a lot of you probably missed her today. And who do we have? Who did I say we have? Oh, John Moynihan will be our next guest. The Firehouse in Newburyport runs that place. If you've ever been there, it is an awesome spot. I hope they're getting through this tough patch, but we're going to talk. He's a great music, theater, pretty much anything along those lines he can talk about. But he books all these guests and runs the place, the Firehouse in Newburyport. On the other side of this pandemic, you got to get to the Firehouse when it's safe to do so, because it is an awesome spot. We'll talk to him next show. So stay tuned for that. All right. But a big thank you to Art Hogan. That was fantastic. Nice little virtual sit down with Art, and learned a lot today from him. So I hope you did too. My name is Drew Moholland. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.